The Galactic Assembly had watched over the stars for 12,000 years. 900 different species had joined its ranks. They came from every corner of the known universe. Some were ancient beyond measure, others were young and eager to prove themselves, but all of them, without exception, knew the one rule that must never be broken: never provoke the humans. It was written in the founding documents. It was taught to every new species when they made first contact. Elders whispered it to their young. Traders spoke of it in hushed voices across distant ports. The rule was older than most civilizations, and no one had ever been foolish enough to test it, until the Vorthan Empire decided they knew better. The Vorthans were a reptilian species with scales the color of dried blood and eyes like molten gold. They had conquered 17 star systems in the past 500 years. Their military was vast, their ships numbered in the thousands. Their soldiers feared nothing in the known galaxy. High Commander PROVOKE stood in his war chamber on the planet Sereth Prime, studying holographic images of human vessels. He had spent 30 years learning everything he could about this strange species. He had read their history. He had watched their broadcasts. He had studied their wars, and he had come to a simple conclusion: the humans were weak. They had no natural weapons, no claws, no armor beneath their soft skin, no venom or telepathy or hive mind. They could not survive in vacuum. They could not see in the dark. They aged quickly and died easily. A single Vorthan warrior could kill 10 humans with his bare hands. More importantly, they fought among themselves constantly. Their history was filled with wars between their own nations. They argued about everything. They could not agree on simple matters of government, or economy, or faith. How could such a divided species ever pose a real threat? The old races fear shadows, PROVOKE told his war council. They have grown timid in their age. They see danger where none exists. The humans are confined to a single star system. They have been in space for barely 5 centuries. Their fleet numbers less than 300 ships. We command 9,000. His advisors nodded in agreement. The numbers did not lie, but the ancient warnings, one advisor said carefully. The Etherians themselves wrote, "The Etherians are dying." PROVOKE cut him off. They cling to traditions because they have nothing else. Their time has passed. Ours is beginning. 3 weeks later, a human colony ship called the Starward Dawn drifted into contested space. It was not a warship. It carried no weapons worth mentioning. It was simply a transport vessel carrying families to a new home on a distant world. 12,000 civilians sat in its belly. Men and women. Elderly couples who wanted to see new horizons. Young parents hoping for better lives for their children. PROVOKE saw an opportunity. He dispatched a strike force to intercept the vessel. The Starward Dawn had no chance. 3 Vorthan cruisers surrounded it within minutes, their weapons locked onto the unarmed ship, and their commander sent a simple message: surrender or die. Captain Danny Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship and felt his heart turn to ice. He was 52 years old. He had served in the merchant fleet for 30 years. He had never fired a weapon in anger. Around him, his crew looked to him for guidance, and he had nothing to give them. "We have children aboard," he transmitted to the Vorthan ships. "We are not a military vessel. We carry no weapons. Please, let us pass in peace." The Vorthan commander laughed. It was a harsh, clicking sound that made Morrison's skin crawl. "You will come with us. Your people will serve as leverage. The human government will pay well for your safe return. Also for people. That you will come with us. You will come with us." Morrison closed his eyes. He thought of his wife back on Earth. He thought of the families in the compartments below. He thought of what the Vorthans would do to them. Then he thought of something else. He opened a secret channel. A channel that every human captain knew but hoped they would never have to use. He spoke 3 words. Condition absolute. Starward Dawn. Then he opened the ship-wide broadcast and addressed his passengers with a calm voice that betrayed nothing of his fear. "This is Captain Morrison. We are being boarded. Do not resist. Cooperate fully. Help is coming." He did not say when. He did not say how. But every adult human on that ship understood. Every parent pulled their children close. Every grandparent squared their shoulders. They would endure whatever came next because they knew, deep in their bones, that Earth would not forget them. The Vorthans boarded without resistance. They herded the humans like cattle into transport pods. They laughed at how easily these soft creatures submitted. They saw fear in human eyes and mistook it for weakness. They did not notice the cold anger beneath that fear. They did not see the way human adults positioned themselves between soldiers and children. They did not understand the looks that passed between strangers who had just become something more than fellow passengers. On Sereth Prime, the humans were paraded through the capital city as trophies. Millions of Vorthans lined the streets to see these pathetic creatures who had somehow frightened the elder races. They threw garbage. They spat. They made crude jokes about human anatomy. A little girl named Megan Carter walked through that crowd holding her mother's hand. She was 9 years old. She had brown hair and green eyes, and a gap between her front teeth. 3 weeks ago, she had been excited about seeing a new planet for the first time. Now she walked past screaming aliens while her mother's grip tightened around her fingers. "Don't look at them, sweetheart," Laura Carter whispered. "Look at me. Only at me." Megan obeyed. She stared up at her mother's face and saw something there she had never seen before. It was not fear. It was something harder. Something sharper. Later, when the guards came to separate the children from their parents, Megan screamed and fought with everything she had. It made no difference. A Vorthan soldier lifted her with one hand and carried her away while her mother shouted her name. Laura Carter watched her daughter disappear into the prison complex. She memorized the face of every guard who touched her child. She noted the layout of the corridors. She counted steps and doorways and security checkpoints. A Vorthan officer noticed her watching and laughed. "Planning an escape? There is no escape. No rescue. Your government will pay what we demand, or you will all die here. It is very simple." Laura said nothing. She simply looked at him with those strange human eyes that showed no tears anymore. Just patience. Just certainty. Far across the galaxy, the Etherians gathered in their ancient halls. They had monitored the situation since the first moment. They had seen this pattern before, long ago, when they were young and foolish enough to test humanity themselves. Their eldest member, a being so old that it remembered stars that had long since died, sent a single transmission to the Vorthan Empire. "You have made a terrible mistake. We cannot help you now. Nothing can help you now. You have taken their children." Krelvox received the message and deleted it without reading past the first line. He would remember that decision for the rest of his very short life. Admiral Katie Lawson was sleeping when the transmission arrived. She had fallen asleep at her desk again, surrounded by reports and cold coffee, her gray hair falling loose from its usual tight bun. At 62 years old, she had served Earth for 4 decades. She had fought in the Mars Uprising. She had commanded ships in the Belt Wars. She had never lost a vessel under her command. Her assistant woke her with a gentle touch and a face pale with fear. "Admiral, you need to see this." Katie sat up slowly. Her bones ached from sleeping in the chair. She rubbed her eyes and looked at the screen her assistant placed before her. Captain Morrison's transmission played. His voice was calm, but Katie had served long enough to hear the terror beneath it. Condition absolute. Those words had not been spoken in 200 years. "How many?" she asked. 12,000 civilians. 4,000 of them children." Katie said nothing for a long moment. She stared at the frozen image of Danny Morrison's face. She had met him once, years ago, at a ceremony honoring merchant captains. He had seemed kind, gentle, the sort of man who became a civilian captain because he loved space but hated war. Now he was a prisoner, along with everyone he had sworn to protect. Katie picked up her communicator and called an emergency session of the United Earth Defense Council. The council chamber filled within the hour. Admirals and generals, politicians and diplomats, all gathered around a massive table lit by holographic displays. They watched the transmission together. They studied the intelligence reports on the Vorthan Empire. They looked at the numbers. 9,000 Vorthan warships, 300 human vessels. The math was brutal and simple. "We cannot win a direct confrontation," said Admiral Peters, commander of the Outer Fleet. "Our ships are faster, but they are fewer. The Vorthans will overwhelm us through sheer numbers. Then we negotiate," suggested Minister Collins, the diplomatic liaison. "We offer them what they want. We pay the ransom. We get our people back." "And then what?" Katie asked quietly. "We pay once, and every species in the galaxy learns that humans can be blackmailed through their children. How many more ships will be taken? How many more families?" The room fell silent. "There is another option," Katie continued, "but it requires a vote from this council. A unanimous vote." She pressed a button on her console. New images appeared on the displays. Ships that no one in the room except Katie had ever seen. Black vessels without curves or beauty. Just angles and armor and weapons. Hundreds of them, hidden beneath the Rocky Mountains, waiting for a moment exactly like this one. "What is this?" Minister Collins breathed. "The Black Contingency, built in secret over the last 3 centuries. 200 warships designed for one purpose only. Total war." The council members stared at the images with mixed expressions. Horror, hope, disbelief. "Why were we not told?" Admiral Peters demanded. "Because knowing would have changed how you thought, how you planned, how you negotiated with other species. The contingency exists precisely because no one knew it existed. Until now." Katie stood and walked to the main display. She zoomed in on the Vorthan homeworld. A pale blue dot surrounded by defense stations and orbital platforms. "We have one chance. We combine the contingency fleet with every ship we can gather. We strike hard and fast. We get our people back. And we send a message that the galaxy will never forget." The vote took less than 5 minutes. It was unanimous. Far away on Seraph Prime, the prisoners were learning to survive. Laura Carter had been separated from her daughter for 3 days. She had not slept. She had barely eaten. But she had done something far more important. She had watched. She had listened. She had learned. The Vorthan guards followed a strict routine. They changed shifts every 6 hours. They gathered in groups of 3 for meals. They avoided certain corridors at certain times because of maintenance schedules. They underestimated humans because humans were small and soft and frightened. Laura was small. She was soft compared to Vorthan's scales. But she was not frightened anymore. She was furious. She shared what she learned with others in her cell block. A retired engineer named Frank helped her map the ventilation systems. A former teacher named Grace memorized guard schedules. A young man named Tyler, barely 20 years old, figured out how to jam the electronic locks using parts from a broken food dispenser. They did not plan an escape. They knew they could not escape. They planned something else entirely. "When our people come," Laura told them, "we need to be ready. We need to know everything about this place. Every weakness, every blind spot, every way to hurt them." "How do you know they will come?" someone asked. Laura smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Because they took our children. Earth will burn the galaxy to ash before letting that stand." In the children's section of the prison, Megan Carter sat alone in her cell. The walls were gray. The bed was hard. The food was strange and tasted like metal. But she did not cry anymore. She had cried until she had no tears left. And now she simply waited. A guard came to check on her twice a day. He was smaller than the others, with scales that had not yet darkened to their adult color. Young, Megan realized. Maybe their version of a teenager. "Why are you not crying anymore?" he asked her one day. He seemed genuinely curious. Megan looked at him with eyes that had aged 10 years in 3 days. "Because crying won't help. My mom taught me that. When things are bad, you don't waste time crying. You think. You plan. You wait." The young guard tilted his head. "Wait for what?" "For my family to come get me." He laughed. But it was an uncertain sound. "Your family is in the other cell block. They cannot reach you." Megan shook her head slowly. Not that family. My bigger family. She gestured upward, toward the ceiling, toward the sky beyond it, toward the stars where Earth waited. The young guard laughed again, but later that night, he found himself unable to sleep. He kept thinking about the look in that small creature's eyes. The absolute certainty. The patience. He told himself it was nothing. Humans were weak. Everyone knew that. But somewhere deep in his chest, in a place he did not like to examine, he felt the first cold touch of doubt. Back on Earth, the fleet was gathering. Ships came from everywhere. Mining haulers from the asteroid belt arrived with mass drivers welded to their hulls. The Red Fleet of Mars, once enemies of Earth, now stood as brothers. Lunar shipyards worked around the clock to restore vessels that had been mothballed for decades. And beneath the mountains, the Black Contingency Fleet powered up its engines for the first time in history. Commander Kevin Price walked through the corridors of his flagship, the Absolute Resolve. He was 38 years old. He had been selected for this command through 100 psychological tests designed to find one thing: a man who would not hesitate. He passed crew members who had trained their entire lives for a war they never thought would happen. He saw determination in their eyes. He saw anger. He saw love for the people they were going to save. At the bridge, he took his seat and opened a channel to Admiral Lawson. "All ships report ready, Admiral." Katie Lawson's voice came back, steady as stone. "Then we go to war." Across the galaxy, the Etherians recorded the moment with a simple note in their ancient archives. "The humans have revealed themselves. May the universe forgive us all for what comes next." The human fleet gathered at the edge of the solar system, beyond the orbit of Neptune, where the light of the sun was just another star among millions. 500 ships hung in the darkness, their running lights blinking like a constellation that had suddenly learned to move. Admiral Katie Lawson stood on the bridge of the command ship Vigilance and watched her fleet assemble. It was the largest human military force ever gathered in one place. It was still less than 1/10 the size of the Vorthan Navy. But Katie was not thinking about numbers. She was thinking about something her grandmother had told her, long ago. When Katie was just a child asking about the old wars on Earth. "We have never been the strongest," her grandmother had said. "We have never been the fastest or the smartest or the most numerous. But we have something that other creatures do not understand. We do not know how to quit. We do not know how to accept defeat. We will fight until we win, or until every last one of us is dead. There is no middle ground." Katie had grown up to learn that her grandmother was right. The fleet began its journey to Vorthan space. Faster-than-light travel was strange and uncomfortable, like being stretched thin across the universe and then snapped back together somewhere else. Human ships were equipped with drives that could cross the galaxy in weeks, but the journey still felt like an eternity to the crew members who knew what waited at the other end. On the Absolute Resolve, Commander Kevin Price spent his time walking among his crew. He learned their names. He learned their stories. He learned why they had volunteered for a mission they might not survive. A young pilot named Chris Reyes told him about his sister on the Starward Dawn. She had been traveling with her husband and 2 young boys. "I'm going to find them," Chris said. His voice was calm, but his hands were shaking. "I'm going to bring them home." A medical officer named Amy Donovan showed Kevin a photograph of her daughter, a 5-year-old girl with curly red hair and a smile that could light up a room. "She's safe on Earth," Amy said. "But those children on Sereth Prime could be her. They could be anyone's children. We don't leave children behind. Ever." Kevin nodded. He understood. Every person on this fleet understood. They were not just fighting for 12,000 strangers. They were fighting for every human child who might ever be threatened. They were fighting to make sure the galaxy never forgot what happened to those who touched humanity's young. The Vorthan Empire detected the human fleet 3 days before it reached their territory. High Commander Krell Vox studied the sensor readings with growing confusion. The intelligence reports had told him that humans possessed less than 300 ships. The fleet approaching his borders numbered over 500. More concerning were the readings from the dark vessels at the center of the formation. His sensors could not get clear data on them. They seemed to absorb scanner beams like black holes swallowed light. "Where did these ships come from?" he demanded. His intelligence officer had no answer. PROVOKE sent a message to the human fleet. He appeared on their screens with all the majesty he could summon, his ceremonial armor gleaming, his voice booming with authority. "Humans of Earth, you have entered Vorthan space. Turn back now, and your people will be returned unharmed. Continue forward, and they will die. You are outnumbered 18 to 1. This is not a battle you can win." Admiral Lawson's response came 30 seconds later. She did not wear ceremonial armor. She did not try to look impressive. She simply sat in her command chair, gray hair pulled back, eyes steady. "We do not negotiate for our children. We do not accept threats against our families. You will release every human prisoner within the next 12 hours, or we will come and take them back. This is not a warning. This is a statement of fact." The transmission ended. PROVOKE stared at the blank screen for a long moment. Then he laughed. "They are insane," he said. "Truly insane. Prepare the defense fleet. We will teach these creatures why the Vorthan Empire has never been defeated." His admirals rushed to obey. 9,000 ships began moving into defensive positions around Sareth Prime. Weapons powered up. Shields activated. Fighters launched from carrier bays. The greatest military force in the sector prepared to crush an enemy less than 1/10 its size. But across the galaxy, ancient species watched the coming battle with something that looked very much like pity. The Etherians, oldest of all living races, gathered their younglings and told them an old story, a story from the time before the Galactic Assembly, before the Great Peace, before anyone knew the true nature of humanity. "Long ago," the eldest Etherian said, "we tested the humans as the Vorthans test them now. We thought them weak because they were soft. We thought them foolish because they fought among themselves. We thought them easy to control because they loved their children so much that love seemed like weakness." The younglings listened with wide, curious eyes. "We were wrong. We learned that their love was not weakness. It was the source of their greatest strength. When we threatened their families, they did not surrender. They did not negotiate. They became something else entirely. Something that did not stop until the threat was ended." "What happened?" a youngling asked. The eldest Etherian was silent for a long moment. "We apologized. We returned what we had taken. We promised never to threaten them again. And we survived." The ancient being turned to look at the stars visible through the viewing port. "The Vorthans have not apologized. The Vorthans have not returned what they took. The Vorthans will not survive." On Sareth Prime, the prisoners felt the change in the air. Guards ran through corridors with fear in their eyes. Alarms sounded in the distance. The prison itself seemed to vibrate with tension. Laura Carter gathered her group in the corner of their cell block and spoke in a low voice. "They're coming. Our people are coming. When the fighting starts, we need to be ready to help. We need to show them where the children are. We need to clear a path." "We have no weapons," Frank pointed out. Laura smiled that cold smile again. "We have our hands. We have our knowledge of this place. We have our anger." She looked at each of them in turn. "And we have something the Vorthans do not understand. We have 12,000 reasons to fight without mercy." In her cell, young Megan Carter felt the vibrations through the floor. She did not know what they meant, but something deep inside her understood. She stood up from her bed and faced the door. "They're coming," she whispered to herself. "I knew they would come." The young Vorthan guard who had spoken to her before passed by her cell. He paused when he saw her standing there, small and fragile and utterly unafraid. "Your fleet approaches," he said. His voice was uncertain now. "But it does not matter. We are too many. Your people will be destroyed." Megan looked at him with those ancient eyes. "No," she said simply. "They won't." And somewhere in the void between stars, 500 human ships prepared to prove her right. The battle began at dawn on Sareth Prime. Though in space there was no dawn. There was only the sudden flash of weapons fire as two fleets met at the edge of the system. High Commander PROVOKE watched from his command ship as his fleet spread out in perfect formation. 9,000 vessels against 500. His admirals had calculated the engagement would last perhaps 2 hours. The humans would be destroyed, their rescue attempt crushed, and the galaxy would learn that the Vorthan Empire feared nothing. The first human ships entered weapons range. PROVOKE expected them to form a battle line, to fight in the traditional manner of civilized species. Instead, they scattered. The human fleet exploded outward like a swarm of insects. Ships moved in patterns that made no sense to Vorthan tacticians. They darted between larger vessels. They grouped and separated and regrouped in different configurations. They seemed to communicate without speaking, as if every captain could read the minds of every other captain. "What are they doing?" PROVOKE demanded. No one could answer. The first Vorthan cruiser died 3 minutes into the battle. A human destroyer, tiny compared to the enemy ship, flew directly at it while taking fire from 6 different directions. Its shields failed. Its hull tore open. It should have died. Instead, it kept coming. The pilot had locked in a collision course and refused to turn away. The destroyer struck the cruiser's bridge section at full speed. Both ships vanished in a ball of fire that lit up the void. PROVOKE stared at the explosion with disbelief. "They killed themselves," he whispered. "They killed themselves to take one of our ships. It was the first death of many." Human pilots did not fight like other species. They did not value their own survival above victory. When their weapons failed, they used their ships as weapons. When their ships were crippled, they continued to fire until their last breath. When death was certain, they chose to make that death count for something. Lieutenant Chris Reyes led a fighter wing against a Vorthan dreadnought. His squadron had been assigned to disable its engines, preventing it from escaping to reinforce other positions. They attacked in waves, dodging defensive fire, losing pilots with every pass. Chris watched his wingmates die one by one. He felt each loss like a physical blow. But he did not stop. He did not retreat. He remembered his sister's face. He remembered his nephew's laughter. His fighter took a direct hit that killed his weapon systems. Another pilot would have pulled back. Chris pushed his engines to maximum and aimed for the dreadnought's engine array. "Tell my sister I love her," he transmitted as his ship screamed toward the enemy vessel. The explosion tore a hole in the dreadnought's hull that would never be repaired. On the medical frigate Mercy's Hand, Nurse Amy Donovan was supposed to stay in the surgical bay and prepare for casualties. Instead, she found herself in a corridor, facing a Vorthan boarding party. The enemy had breached the ship's hull. Thinking a medical vessel would be an easy target, they had not expected to find wounded Marines who refused to stay in their beds, and a medical staff who had grabbed weapons from fallen soldiers. Amy had never fired a weapon in her life. She had spent her career healing people, not hurting them. But when the Vorthan soldiers raised their rifles toward her patients, something changed inside her. She picked up a fallen Marine's weapon and pulled the trigger. The boarding party had expected easy victims. They found a small army of doctors and nurses and wounded soldiers who fought with a fury that made no sense to their tactical minds. These humans were injured. They were outnumbered. They were supposed to surrender. They did not surrender. Amy moved through the corridors with the weapon in her hands, protecting her patients, singing an old Earth war song her grandfather had taught her. Her voice was soft and steady as she fired again and again. The boarding party was eliminated. Not a single Vorthan soldier made it back to their ship. In the command room of the Vorthan flagship, PROVOKE watched his fleet being torn apart. 4 hours into the battle, he had lost 2,000 ships. The humans had lost perhaps 80. "This is impossible," he said. "The numbers make no sense." His tactical officer's voice was shaking. "They do not fight like any species we have faced. They absorb losses that would break other fleets. They sacrifice themselves without hesitation. Every time we destroy one of their ships, the others fight harder, then destroy them all. We are trying. But for every ship we kill, they take 3 of ours with them." PROVOKE slammed his fist against his console. He had studied humans for 30 years. He had thought he understood them. He had been completely, utterly wrong. He opened a channel to Admiral Lawson. "Enough," he said. "We will negotiate. Name your terms. Lawson's face appeared on his screen. She looked tired. She looked old. But her eyes were made of iron. You had 12 hours to return our people. That time has passed. There are no terms now. But you are winning. Take your victory and leave. Katie Lawson shook her head slowly. You still do not understand. This was never about victory. This was never about territory or resources or power. You took our children. There is only one way this ends now. The transmission cut off. 7 hours later, the Vorthan fleet existed only in memories. 7,000 ships drifted as wreckage through the system. The survivors had fled in all directions, broadcasting warnings that went unheard because there was no one left to listen. The greatest military force in the sector had been reduced to scattered remnants running for their lives. Human losses were significant. Nearly 100 ships destroyed. Thousands of crew members dead. But the fleet pressed forward without pause, without celebration, without mercy. On Sereth Prime, the people in the streets looked up at the sky and saw the lights of the battle fading. They saw human ships descending toward their world. They heard the thunder of drop pods entering the atmosphere. Krelvox received one final transmission from Admiral Lawson as the first Marines landed on his planet. We are coming for our families. Anyone who stands between us and them will die. Anyone who helps us will be spared. Choose wisely. Endured. Something the 21. Choose wisely. The High Commander of the Vorthan Empire sat alone in his palace and understood, finally, what the ancient warnings had meant. He understood why every elder race in the galaxy had one rule they would never break. He had provoked the humans. He had threatened their children, and now there was nothing left but to face the consequences. Outside his window, the sky burned with the light of descending ships. The humans had arrived, and they had come for what was theirs. The drop pods fell like rain on Sereth Prime. Sergeant Ben Torres hit the ground running, his boots leaving prints in alien soil that had never known human feet before. Around him, his squad formed up with practiced speed. They had trained for this their entire careers. They had prayed they would never have to do it. Now they moved through the streets of the Vorthan capital with weapons raised and hearts full of cold determination. The Vorthans who resisted died quickly. The ones who threw down their weapons and knelt with their hands raised were left alone. There was no time for prisoners. There was no interest in conquest. The Marines had one mission, and one mission only. Get the children, get the families, get everyone home. Laura Carter heard the explosions from her cell block. She had spent the last hours preparing her group for this moment. They knew every guard position. They knew every shortcut through the prison. They knew exactly where the children were being held. When the lights flickered and the locks on their cells suddenly failed, Laura did not hesitate. She grabbed the sharpened piece of metal she had hidden under her mattress and led her group into the corridor. They found the first guard around the corner. He was young, nervous, reaching for his weapon with shaking hands. Laura moved faster. The metal found his throat before he could scream. No mercy, she told her group. Not today. Not for them. They fought through the prison with nothing but improvised weapons and 30 years of rage. Frank used his engineering knowledge to disable security systems. Grace drew maps from memory that guided them through maintenance tunnels. Tyler, young and fast, ran ahead to scout for ambushes. They lost 2 of their number in the fighting. Good people who died so others could live. Laura promised herself she would remember their names forever. When they reached the children's section, they found the doors locked and guards inside threatening to kill hostages if the humans advanced. It was a standoff that could have lasted hours. Then Sergeant Torres and his squad arrived from another direction, having breached through an exterior wall. The standoff lasted exactly 4 seconds. Megan Carter was sitting on her bed when her cell door exploded inward. She did not scream. She did not flinch. She simply looked at the armored figure standing in the doorway and asked one question. Are you here to take me to my mom? Ben Torres had been a Marine for 15 years. He had seen combat on a dozen worlds. He had killed more enemies than he could count, but looking at this small girl with her ancient eyes and her quiet courage, He felt tears streaming down his face. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm here to take you home." He lifted her in his arms and carried her through the broken prison, past bodies and wreckage, and the ruins of an empire that had made the worst mistake in galactic history. Other Marines were doing the same throughout the complex, carrying children who were too small to run, supporting adults who were too weak to walk. Laura Carter found her daughter in the courtyard outside. She ran to her faster than she had ever run in her life. She pulled Megan into her arms and held her so tight that neither of them could breathe. "I knew you would come," Megan whispered. "I told them you would come." Laura could not speak. She could only hold her daughter and cry tears of joy and relief and something else entirely. Something that felt like gratitude for every human who had fought and died to make this moment possible. High Commander PROVOKE was captured in his palace 3 hours after the landings began. He had tried to escape. He had tried to hide. He had tried to negotiate. None of it mattered. The Marines who found him did not beat him or torture him or give him the death he probably deserved. They simply put him in chains and brought him to Admiral Lawson, who had landed to oversee the final stages of the operation. Katie stood before the being who had started all of this. She was exhausted. She had not slept in days. She had lost friends and colleagues and ships under her command, but she stood straight and tall, her eyes never leaving his. "You will face trial before the Galactic Assembly," she said. "You will answer for what you have done." "I was trying to make my people strong," PROVOKE said. His voice was bitter. "I was trying to prove that we were not weak." "You proved something," Katie agreed, "but not what you intended." The trial took place 3 months later, broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. Species that had watched the war from a distance now saw its conclusion. They saw PROVOKE in chains. They saw the evidence of what the Vorthans had done. They saw the human families reunited, holding each other, alive because a fleet of strangers had crossed the galaxy to save them. And they saw Admiral Lawson deliver humanity's message to the universe. She stood at the center of the assembly chamber. A small human woman surrounded by beings from 900 different species. Her voice was calm and clear. "We do not conquer. We do not enslave. We ask only to live in peace with our neighbors. We extend friendship to all who offer it honestly. But hear this clearly." She paused, and the silence in the chamber was absolute. "Our children are sacred. Our families are not bargaining chips. We will not negotiate with those who threaten them. We will not show mercy to those who harm them. Any species that forgets this lesson will learn it again, as the Vorthans have learned it, written in fire across their skies." The Vorthan Empire was dissolved. Their military was dismantled. Their leaders faced justice, and across the galaxy, the oldest rule was carved deeper into every archive, every treaty, every warning beacon. Never provoke the humans. Not because they were the strongest or the most advanced, but because when you threatened what they loved, they became something that did not stop, did not negotiate, did not forgive. The Etherians updated their ancient archives with a final note. Humanity is not a warrior species. They are a protective species. Warriors seek battle. Humans seek peace. Until peace is denied them, then they become the end of worlds. Remember this. Always remember this. 20 years later, Megan Carter stood in the same assembly chamber where PROVOKE had been sentenced. She was no longer a frightened child in a prison cell. She was the first human ambassador to the Galactic Assembly, chosen specifically because she had lived through the event that defined humanity's place in the universe. An alien diplomat, curious and young, approached her after her first formal address. "I have studied your species for many years," he said. "I have read the histories. I have seen the recordings of the war. But I still do not understand. Why are humans so feared? You are not the largest or the strongest. You do not have natural weapons or armor. What makes you different?" Megan smiled. It was a warm smile, genuine and kind. But somewhere deep in her eyes, the alien saw something else, something old, something patient, something that remembered. "We are not scary at all," she said softly. We just love our families very much." The diplomat nodded politely and walked away. But later that night, he found himself unable to sleep. And he finally understood why the eldest races had written their oldest rule: never provoke the humans, never threaten their children, never mistake their kindness for weakness, because they would cross the galaxy. They would burn through any fleet. They would tear down any empire. They would sacrifice everything they had. For family, always for family.